My name's Kevin Parker. I work for a fabulous software company called Serena Software. We're headquartered in San Mateo. And last year, we bumped into some extraordinary people at Knowsy, and they collaborated with our marketing engineers to build a really incredible game that we now use as a critical part of our sales process. And so what I want to talk to you about this morning is how you can use a game like the social IT game that we created with Knowsy to really bind yourself to your customers and really provide your customers with the kind of service from an organization that they really crave. Now, there are two things that I know about customers, and the first thing is that they are absolutely desperate for clear communication. So one of the biggest problems we have when we're talking to our customers is we often don't understand what they're saying, and more often they don't understand what we're saying. But you know, it's not just a problem between the vendor and the customer, it's also a problem inside the customer's organization, that the different parts of the organization don't clearly understand what the motives are and what the priorities are of the different parts of the organization. So the Knowsy game that was built for us, a social IT game, then enables us to give our customers that one vital piece of information, to give them knowledge, because knowledge is power. Who said that?
Bacon?
Sir Francis Bacon, yes, yeah. Absolutely, which is why the bacon. There were clues. There are always going to be clues in the pictures to help with the presentation.
And I guess there will be a test at the end too.
Yes. If you would prefer 5-minute joke warnings, I could give those. Okay. So, what is it that the salesperson wants? The salesperson wants active engagement with their customers. I don't know if you've been reading this. There's been a spate of new books on sales in the last few months, but there's always talk now about the challenger sales. There's the new book by Daniel Pink talking about how everybody really is a salesperson. There is this innate desire for salespeople to really properly understand the customer, because when you have that understanding, then you can sell them something. There's no point talking to customers and just trying to back the lorry up and push the product out the door and run away. You really have to find something that they need to know. And what the challenger sales tells us is that the most successful salespeople are not those relationship sellers. It's not the people who are the lone wolf in their territories. It's not the people who do all the hard work. It's the challenger salesperson who says to a customer, frankly, I disagree with almost everything you just said. Because that really gets the customer's attention. It may get you turfed out of the meeting, but it does get their attention. And if you can provide your customer with an insight that they don't have, that they immediately understand is exactly how their business works, they're going to pay attention to you. And so what the salesperson who's going to be successful is really looking for is, how do I capture that insight? What is the way of doing that? Well, the only successful way of doing that is by talking to everybody in the organization. And if you're in sales, you know that nobody's going to let you do that. So what the game that we built does is enables us to get the insight to the customer. Because what the customer really wants is for someone to come along and move their organization forward for the least amount of investment, the least amount of pain, and to do things that are going to make a difference to that organization. You know, that we often follow fashion. It's very interesting to me over the last 30 years watching the trends in our industry, how as we move from fashion to fashion, even though the things necessarily benefit directly, because it's fashionable and nobody got fired for being fashionable. But those renegades, those people who take a different stance, sometimes they're the ones who are actually the most successful. And so if you can empower a customer with information that nobody else in the organization has that makes them the hero, then they're going to come back to you for more sales. So let's talk about what we did. Well, we built something that we call the Myers-Briggs for IT. And this enables us to look at every individual in the organization and make an assessment about who they are, what motivates them, and what their priorities are. Now, if you're not familiar with Myers-Briggs, when you get a copy of these slides, there's a button down in the corner. You can press the button, it'll take you to a website, and you can get your 4-character definition of your Myers-Briggs personality type. Who here has done Myers-Briggs? Yeah, of course, most of us come across it at some point in our lives. I remember at Serena, we did Myers-Briggs for my entire department. I was the VP of engineering, and we put all of the different Myers-Briggs up on the big screen, and all the engineers, all their definitions were all more or less the same. There was one odd one out, and that was me. And so that's why they got me to do sales, because clearly my engineering days are way behind me. And so I am an INTP guy, so I still love the problem-solving part, which is why I love sales. My fiance is an INFP, so this truly is a marriage made in heaven. Well, it better be, because Saturday's coming fast. Which is why my mum's here, for those of you who weren't here earlier. Okay, so we created a Myers-Briggs template for our customers, looking at the different kinds of vectors that influence how they make their decisions, and trying to assess through the game what their priorities were, and try and identify the different kinds of motivations that each customer has, so that when we approach those individuals to sell them software, we know what their priorities are, but more importantly, so we can help them with their colleagues so that they can sell that solution to them, or sell a solution that's of benefit to both of them. So let's do a test. Most of us have a superficial understanding of the people in our organization. So meet Pete. So here's what we know about Pete from standing at the water cooler. He's got it in electronic engineering. He's married with a couple of kids. He plays football, that is to say the proper kind of football at the weekend, with a round ball.
Soccer or football?
Football.
Football, not soccer.
Football.
Okay.
What is soccer?
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Football, the proper kind. Okay. So as I said, there will always be clues on the slides. Yeah. He lives in Santa Clara, which is a fabulous place to live, of course. He likes to go skiing in Tahoe. And he's been with this fictitious company called Clarius for 7 years. So that's what we all know about Pete from standing by the water cooler. So let me ask you a really tough question about Pete's priorities in life. What kind of car does he drive?
Oh, that's a Prius. Maybe out there.
Yeah, so who thinks he drives a Prius? Yeah, a couple, 3 people, okay. What about a Ford Taurus? Anybody think he drives a Ford Taurus? No, okay. A Volvo S60, remember he's got a couple of kids? Yeah. What about the Subaru? Yeah. A 911 Porsche? No. And what about the BMW X3? Yeah, because they're good for kids, yeah, okay. Yeah. What's his favorite movie? Terminator? Terminator? Yeah, yeah. Die Hard? Yeah. Finding Nemo? Yeah, he's got a couple of kids. The Godfather? Sleepless in Seattle? Does he look like the romantic type? Yeah. Avatar? Yeah. Now, you see what's happening here is that we're making value judgments about Pete based on standing with him next to the water cooler. And even though we're making value judgments about what kind of car he drives and value judgments about his favorite movie, we also make those same kind of value judgments through our interactions with him when we're in meetings with him talking about the kinds of things that are important to him related to data center operations. And we make those value judgments without any data whatsoever. And so when we go pitch Pete on a project of ours that we think is going to be a benefit to him, we don't really know what motivates him. Well, let's see Pete's colleague. So let's greet Preet. Yes, I know the alliterations are terrible, aren't they? So Preet is in charge of change control. So Preet and Pete are very important colleagues in the IT society at Clarius. Preet commutes from Santa Cruz. She's has a master's from the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. She transferred from Wipro, so she was insourced rather than being outsourced. She went skydiving on her last birthday, and she's got about 60 staff, a third of whom are still in Bangalore. What are Preet's priorities when it comes to doing her job? What are her priorities? What's the most important thing, do you think, about Clarius? Clarius is an insurance company, let's say, you know, in the kind of Geico look and feel. So if you were Vice President of Change Control, what would be your most important thing? What would be the most important thing to you if you own Change Control? Minimizing risk. Right. Because if we put a bad change out there and we stop claims processing, that would be pretty bad. Yeah. But it's insurance, right? That damn salamander or whatever it's a gecko, right? It's a gecko, right? And that damn duck, thank goodness the duck's in hospital. we're safe from the duck for a while now. Yeah. You know, those are very competitive businesses. You know, if you know, 1 out of every section of adverts on the TV is an insurance advert, it must be really competitive. So maybe increasing the velocity of changes is important to the business. And so what we now have to start to think about is what really are Preet's priorities. And so if we could understand, when we look at the different factors involved in Preet's job, what her priorities are, that would really make a difference to our ability to sell to her. But you know what is really the most interesting question? Is what does Preet think are Pete's priorities? She has no way of being able to find those out other than sitting down and asking him, or being at meetings and inferring it, or trying to put herself in his mindset. And so that's what the social IT game is about. So this is the social IT game, and when you enter into the game as the facilitator, what you're given is a number of different subject matter areas to work with. We warm the crowd up by asking them what their favorite wine is or what kind of superpower they would like to have. I can tell you that most of the software developers choose time travel. I can tell you that most of the change control people choose invincibility. It's very interesting what different categories of people pick for their superpower. I can tell you which is the most popular supercar that executives would like to own, and it would be an Aston Martin, because I actually forced them to give that answer because I'm British. Because we also give prizes out, and I suggest that if they pick Aston Martin, they'll have prizes. So we find out fun things about them, but we also look at the entire life cycle. We look at and see what's important about demand management. We care very much about what's important in developing the software, what's important in getting the quality of the software to be right, in the development process and in the testing process. We talk about what's important methodologically. We talk about the release management process and automation of deployment and continuous delivery, and we have a whole raft of different subject areas that we can test them on, all the way through into the application, living in production and being managed and supported. And what we do then is we pick a bunch of priority items, and then as the leader, I define what I think are my priorities. And then what we do is we invite other people to join the game, and they do the same process. They look at the subject area we're discussing, they prioritize what they think is important to them about that particular subject area. Let's say, in this case, we're talking about release management. And then the fun really begins, because now we ask them the difficult question. What is it that the people around the table, your colleagues, your partners in application development, what are their priorities? What do you perceive to be their priorities? And the results are remarkable, because now I have to sit here as a facilitator. I've met Pete for the very first time, and Pete's the ops guy, and I say, in that conversation at the bar before we got started, what did I learn about Pete? Is he passionate about the business? Is he passionate about technology? You know, did he talk about cost saving, or did he talk about investment? And I try and get my head into that person's head. Now, we've done quite a few of these games, and the good news is that I actually now can start to predict where different mindsets go when it comes to these priorities. And so while I'm guessing Pete and Preet and anybody else who's joined the game, they're doing the same about me, and they're doing the same about their colleagues. And after a while, what we start to learn is where those people understand one another. And as the game progresses, little tokens appear on the icons saying, you know, if you have guessed that person, or if that person is still entering data. It's a very nice interface. This interface runs in standard browsers like Safari and IE and Mozilla. It runs beautifully on iPads, and that's what we do when we have these events. We take a bunch of red iPads, because that's Serena's color. and it's a very engaging and fun game. It does require access to the cloud. So one of the events that we did on a boat out in the Chesapeake Bay with somebody's MiFi. That was a very long game, because the latency was terrible. But hey, it was still a great game, because we're out on the water having fun. And we've done them in restaurants. I'm sorry?
You were drinking, so it was.
We were lubricating the event, yes.
Do these work on Android?
Yes, they do. Sorry for not mentioning that. It's the Cupertino effect, right? So this Cupertino gravity is very strong here, and it prohibits your ability to use the word Android. Okay, so when everybody has entered their choices and guessed their colleagues, then we get to see who is the winner.
What is the winner?
So the winner then, that's an absolutely fabulous question.
Nice lead in for you.
It's such a fabulous question because I know the answer.
Oh.
So the winner then is determined by how well you score guessing your colleagues. So if you get the order right, you get points for that. If you get the first and last choice right, you get more points for that, because understanding a person's top priority and least priority is, we think, more important. And then what we can see then is how well people have matched. So this is kind of like Match.com live around a dinner table. Now, what makes this go altogether better is if there are prizes. So we run about 5 games per evening. We start with one of the silly games, the superpowers, automobiles, wine. And then for the winners of individual games, so we'll often run this event with maybe 4 tables, 4 or 5 people at each table. And so we give out Amazon gift cards to the people who win the individual games. And then people pay more attention, curiously. The theme at Serena, our marketing message about the technology that we sell, we call it orchestrated IT. And what that means is that we have the ability from demand to deployment and beyond to automate the business of IT, whether it's development or testing or deployment or release management or service management. And so we use this term orchestration then to represent that. Yes, I don't know either why we have pictures of rowers when it's orchestrated IT, but I guess we could orchestrate the rowers, give them some nice tune to hum as they're rowing. Who knows? And so we give out prizes that are orchestra related. So we give out the world's smallest violin to the person who wins the evening, and so they can take that to meetings and take it out when somebody in the meeting is being tedious. It usually sends a very subtle message to the person to stop being tedious. We also give out jam boxes to people too who do extraordinary things in the event. And of course, they are the red ones, theme here. And then everybody goes home with a box of Mozart chocolate in the shape of a violin, of course. Okay, so prizes are very important. It does help the evening go along. And once we announce the big prize game, where the jam box is given away, the competitive nature comes out in everybody. And people now suddenly start realizing that they should have talked more in the warm-up at the beginning. And they start to study people and you see them staring into their eyes and thinking, yeah, he wants to spend a lot of money. And so they make their decisions on that basis. So once the big reveal is who is the winner, the game host in this case, then what we do is we actually see how those scores came about. And what we see then is how the different matches have occurred and how many points each person got. Now it's not easy to see from this, and so what we do then is we have the ability to lift any individual up into the corner, and then we can see how that person individually matched. Now for most of the people in the game, they think, oh, this is the point. I now understand that how well I understand Pete is better than how well I understand Preet, and this person who staggered in off the street who I've never met before, of course, I know nothing about them. But the reality is that this is where the game really starts from a sales point of view. Because now, as the facilitator, this is where all my skill and experience and powers of observation really matter. Because what I now do is make a very quick assessment of the data sets that have been provided. And I'm looking for patterns, and I'm looking for dissonance. And so what I immediately see then is that the game host matched with the guru. So we pre-programmed into the data sets what we think a reasonable CIO would do when they were ordering that list. And so we see that the game host got the CIO's top priority and bottom priority exactly as the CIO did, but varied the order in between. And so we talk about this, the CIO. His name is Doug Serena. You can find Doug Serena on YouTube. There's a series of episodes talking about Doug Serena's life, and you'll hear his point of view about many things. And then what we start to do is compare the game host with other members of the group. So for example, notice that the game host picked application-centric deployment as the least important priority. And so did two of the other participants. And so now the game host then facilitates a conversation with the participants saying, why did you choose that? You know, was it because you don't understand the term? Is it because your release environment is these mega releases, these 9-month Titanic releases, rather than a fast cadence of individual applications being released? And so now we have a conversation about the style of release management that's very informative, that even though Pete didn't pick that, now Pete's tuning in to that conversation and learning how people describe why that's their least priority. We look for the fact that over here, was the only person who put secure path to production below halfway. And so, you know, let's challenge Audi to find out why secure path to production was least important to that person. And then again, another debate will ensue amongst the people around the table so that there's illumination on the topic because you've now got people's declared a point of view, and now they get to talk about that and maybe defend it and maybe change it based on the way in which the conversation goes. And so we do this facilitation for about 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how engaging it is and how differently patterned or how similarly patterned the results are, and draw out of that as much insight as we possibly can. And then as we go through the next game and the next game, and we get into more complex and more pivotal subjects for the organization, suddenly everyone starts to see the value and they engage really powerfully in those conversations, and the facilitator is able to step back. It's very important that those facilitated moments are an egoless environment. So if the boss is there, you have to prep the boss ahead of time to check his or her ego at the door and to let the people speak. Because quite often if the boss is dominating the conversation, you get no conversation. Okay, so the facilitation part really is for me the best part, and it's why I have the best job in the world. Yes, sir.
I just want to be clear here. I think I'm inferring an answer to my question, but the way you ask is, it looks to me in the game, you say, how to best improve. It's being part of releases, and you get bonus points for correct answers, which infers there's an established objective best. I don't even know if that makes sense, an objective best.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So as I thought through it, I think it's down the game plan. So I'm saying, when you're not directly asking me what I think is the best, maybe what you want to get out of me, I don't know. Am I guessing, am I putting down what I think is best, what I think the established best would be, whether I agree with it or not, or what I'm guessing other players, and does it matter really, or is it because it's going to facilitate discussion, it doesn't really matter how I look at it?
Right, so your analysis is perfect, because the key here is there is no right answer.
Right.
Because when you look at the list of things that we have to do in our jobs every day, we instinctively will lean towards the things that we've been told are organizational priorities. But over time, those priorities change and management changes and give new directives to other people. And so any organization has a group of people that are operating to a set of priorities that they think are important. And the purpose here is to illuminate what each individual's priorities are. There is no right answer, because in an organization that is very dynamic, the velocity of change is much more important than perhaps the quality of change. All of us are now quite used to the fact that every morning we wake up, there's a little red bug which says you've got 9 applications that need updating. And we think nothing of saying, update all. Yeah, but in the corporate environment, if we had that every day, 9 applications were updated last night that you use, there would be fear and panic. Unless there's a cultural shift which says, hey, the last change that happened yesterday was benign and minor and I didn't know what it was. So velocity of change may be important to one organization. Something that's highly risk averse, many of our customers are organizations of the government, and they're very risk averse. We're not allowed to use their names. So we have very strange mimes for them. But and they're very risk averse, and so change to them is really something they have great angst over, because they, the safety of our nation's at risk potentially. So given this continuum of high velocity and low risk, where is that organization, and what does that mean to how they affect their priorities? And so the idea here is that it will help me as a development manager to understand what motivates Pete, the ops guy, or Preet, the change control person, if I know more about what their priorities are.
I guess what I'm asking is, so Pete comes at it thinking, okay, I'm going to put down, these are my priorities, and I actually think they're the best and will match. And Pete comes in and says, well, my priorities are these, but I don't think I'm going to win with that, because I think the conventional wisdom, so I'm going to put down what I think the conventional wisdom is. If the list, they're answering the question, right? And so my question was, is that okay? Because
Yeah.
it's the discussion afterwards when you guys come back.
Exactly. So that's exactly the point. So even if people do, they say, well, I don't want to look foolish and I don't want to look radical, so I'm going to go with what's the given wisdom at my organization. When we get into the debate and, Preet is suddenly defending a position that she doesn't really believe in, that becomes apparent. And when the discussion then leans more towards her point of view, she says, what a relief, because yes, this is critical to our organization. I'm glad we all understand that. So that's why this game is about facilitation. That's very important. I'm sorry, sir, you're going to...
No, I think you answered. I saw where it was going, and you organize a sequence of games. What you really want to do is stimulate conversation.
Exactly right.
Right. And you take from a simplistic level of, like, the first game might be about cars. What do you like? All right. And and I'm trying to figure out what yours and what yours and what hers and his. All right. And then and you stimulate. Well, I wrote it down here. Is you either want to find likenesses and clarify that, or you want to find the differences as you point with D and discuss those, and then you go on to the next game.
Yeah.
A game probably doesn't last very long.
No, game times are about 15 minutes.
Okay.
So it's about 10 minutes of setting up. It's about 5 minutes setting up the game, 5 doing the game data entry, right, and then 5 minutes of discussion. But one has to be flexible, because if this discussion's intense and there's real truth coming out, you want to encourage that. Yeah.
Okay.
So it is a little bit dynamic. It's not formulaic, but it is. Boy, is it fun.
I'm sure.
When the event's over, what we do is we send this report to the organization. If we're doing this for a particular company in their offices, we will customize it. If it's a public event that we run, where we invite customers from the neighborhood to come visit, we send out a generic version. And what this report then is, it shows the accumulated data from that event and points out how people did prioritize the different things that we discussed during the event. And so for our sales contact, then this becomes the beginning of a conversation about how Serena has now helped her become much more knowledgeable about her organization, and about how, and of course, subtly in here are suggestions of Serena solutions that would help facilitate the things that clearly that organization cares about. Yes?
So on this report, is this part of the innovation games piece, or did you customize this in addition to the Knowsy version?
Right. So what we get from Knowsy are the data, and then we drop those into a boilerplate report. Yeah. Because our question set is peculiar to our business. Yeah. So there's a lot of Serena IP in the narrative here. Brilliant.
To have this report.
Yeah.
One of the things, like having the output of what you get at the end of the game is good, but for a salesperson, 2-3 pages would be really great, and we can just shuffle through that. So that is a really cool piece that you've added.
And when we make the next sales call, we now know what are the hot buttons, and we can lead the conversation in that direction.
Are you putting this into your CRM, Salesforce, or are you capturing it and maintaining it?
I don't think the data, well, so yes is the short answer. All the customer contact goes in there, so this gets attached to Salesforce. But I don't think the data cube that we've developed yet is quite big enough for us to do some other things with it. So the next thing to do with all of this data then is start to assert publicly what the feelings of IT are about certain topics based on the individual experiences that we have. For me, that's a job of a lifetime.
How did you first introduce this to your first customer?
So we offered to buy them dinner at Ruth's Chris in Boston.
Start at the high level.
Yeah. And so that's exactly how we did it. So what we did is we set up a bunch of dates, and it were 15 dates around the country. So I think we started in about April and went through July. And so I traveled from city to city for several months, doing these to an invited audience of about 20 customers each evening. And what we would do is have a table 4 or 5 with a Serena person just to manage the technology because it was new to everybody. And we would buy them dinner, and we'd pick somewhere nice for dinner. Ruth Chris, Smith and Walensky, some really fancy place in Dallas, but big on steaks, of course. And it really sort of got the whole thing going. It helped us iron a few bugs out in the technology. They were just sort of interface issues, the technology was fine. It was just how you operated inside the product. And we got very good at doing the facilitation because we started to see patterns. And when we didn't see the pattern, that was also data. And we would say, normally we expect to see this. And then they would say, well, that's because our organization really cares about this other thing. And that's why the data was skewed. And so it became this massive data collection opportunity for us at Serena. And then this was also a teaser. So we could say, if you think this has been fun with strangers, imagine what this is like with your colleagues. And so then we got lots of calls, can you come in and do this over a lunchtime? I'm going to, my team meeting's Monday afternoon. Can you do this for the team meeting that Monday afternoon? Yeah. And so now we got the salesman's dream. The sales guy gets to sit down with the facilitator from Serena and 6 or 7 senior executives of that organization they've never met before. So now they've got business cards, now they've got entrees. It's a wonderful thing.
These are current customers.
Yes.
And you're not this is a free service.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it's not expensive. Yeah. So we buy dinner for 20 people.
Right.
A few $100s.
In fact.
Yeah. Exactly. And now we get something concrete from them. Yeah. And of course it's engaging. And nobody's selling to them like this, and they don't even realize they're being sold to.
What about if you were not aligned with your CIO? Because you showed that you are 4 aligned with the CIO.
Yeah.
So you understood everybody else better than anybody else. But you're not aligned to the CIO. Then you become the CIO.
So this is, okay, so this isn't the real CIO. This is just a virtual CIO that Serena created. But sure, if Pete's analysis of Preet is completely wrong and Preet's about to become Pete's boss, is that a problem? I don't think so. I think it's great that now these two people understand their business priorities on all the different aspects of technology in their organization so that can facilitate a conversation. I have to tell you that in my career, there was one moment that I believe was the pinnacle of my career. For about 2 years, I ran the product management organization at Serena. And there was not a single product manager in Serena who didn't fundamentally disagree with everything I said. It was spectacular. We would have the most extraordinary debates about which hill we were going to take and how we were going to take it. And at the end of those debates, what we would end up with is a new consensus that was better than either opinion to start with. And it was really interesting how much progress we made because we didn't agree about very much. I mean, it was not disagreement in a personal sense. It was just, it was priorities, it was vision, but it was not personal. And as a result, the benefits were enormous to Serena because new stuff came out that wouldn't have come out from a single person's point of view. And that's, again, the skill of the facilitator is to keep it at the professional level, keep it about the information that's being garnered here. And most people are professional in these events, particularly with strangers there, outsiders, and so it does illuminate more information as a result of that.
Agreement doesn't necessarily mean alignment.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, how hard was it to create this in Knowsy?
Not difficult at all. So what we do is we have basically a spreadsheet with the titles and the categories. The only hard part actually is the creation of the little backgrounds, the bitmaps for the backgrounds. But they're so generic that now we can just put them together very quickly. On the supercars, we put the logo, Aston Martin logo, and so on. But you don't have to go to that extent. And then we just ship off the spreadsheet, and then they appear in the game later. We recently did one of these events for Safeway, and Safeway had a whole set of questions that they wanted to inject into the process, different from the standard set that we had. And of course, we were just thrilled to do that. Because they were, so one of the things that they were particularly looking for is how well the leadership team of IT understood business priorities. And so they asked some really interesting questions about, I mean, a bizarre question as how important is detailed chargeback to the business? So, you know, an odd question, and you know, compared to how important is the rate of turn of the software for the business. And it was really fascinating because the rate of turn for some people in the room was the #1 priority, and the detailed chargeback was the #1 priority for another group of people in the room. And the people who were concerned about the rate of being able to get more releases more quickly belong to a unit of Safeway that is about their loyalty program, about that card that we all have that gets us discounts at the cash register. Because that's the most important way that Safeway generates revenue, by encouraging people to come back. And so that extension now to, you know, the personalized coupons and all the rest of it, that's only been possible because they've been able to iterate the software so fast. But other parts of the organization where they're very cost conscious, because retail grocery has got wafer thin margins, they really care about making sure that every penny is accounted for. So it was interesting that particular dichotomy was fascinating because it drew out of that conversation that people who are shared resources, like the release control people who service both of these groups, you know, are having to deal with two different sets of competing priorities.